Hello, this is Rats at ICC. I've just jumped into the 45-minute pool. I'm paired against Zile. Got a quick pairing. He doesn't yet realize it's his move and his clock is ticking, but he will soon enough. So I'm going to sit here and share my thoughts as I undertake a game. He's played C4. Okay, now, how do I want to play against C4? I generally have a set opening strategy against all the main moves, E4 and D4, and even knight F3. C4, I often vary with what I do, so I've got to come up with something to entertain you. What I'll do is I'm pretty familiar with the symmetrical English, and I've talked about it, so I will show my stuff for what it's worth. I'll play the symmetrical English, and for those that are interested in the English opening, hopefully you'll find this game enlightening, and I'll play something that's justifiably proper and good and hopefully educational. Okay, so how do I want to play against this? Generally, I'll just follow a symmetrical approach, and I'll explain some of the offshoot lines that I have. And of course, White may go into his own offshoot line well ahead of me. We don't know yet. We have to wait and see how White handles this. So it's common both knights will come out, both sides will fiend Ke1 Qa1, and White will play D4. That's the main symmetrical, but I have other options aside from that, and I may play one of them just to illustrate the viability of a defense. Again, it depends on how he plays it. I won't commit to anything until I've seen what he does. Okay, I know in some positions, I played one game in the league where I played, not just yet, but I took on C3 just to get him out of a main line, and something I was familiar with. Don't know if I'll go into that line or anything else. So for now, I'll just copy him and wait and see what he does. I think if E3, that's the point where I take on C3, because he's committing pawns to dark squares, so his dark square bishop would be a little less effective. Pretty sure that was the line that I played. But I'll have to stop and think about it as we go. I've got plenty of time on the clock, and we haven't seen his moves. Now, neither of us can get D5 in. We're both controlling D5, so it's off, or pawn to queen 4 if you prefer English descriptive notation. One advantage with that old outdated notation is that you only have to say a move once to be understood on either side. So for instance, if I say, and black tries for pawn, and you try for pawn to queen 4 here, I don't have to say you try for D4 or D5. See, there's a little difference. Both sides are trying for pawn to queen 4, or White's trying for D4, Black's trying for D5. It's a longer sentence. Okay, he played the slower D3. Okay, so let's look at some of the offshoots. I can in turn play for D5 myself. As I said, Black can play the symmetrical version of the English himself. It's basically the same strategies with colors reversed and Black's down a half a tempo. To do that, I would play knight F6. And if he plays knight F3, then I'm ready for D5. And now we go into the symmetrical with colors reversed, and it's perfectly good for Black. It's perfectly good for White. The only difference is Black's a tempo down. But he doesn't have to be so cooperative and play knight F3, allowing me the chance to play D5. There are some lines where Black plays E6 and knight Ge7, and I'm not quite primed to do that. So, well, I am primed to do it, but I'm trying to remember the structure. Usually, what Black does that against 5 knight F3, and so here Black could go, or White could go into a number of formations after I play knight F6, which I'm leaning towards. He could go into E4, which will stop me from playing D5, but I have a new set of plans on that. It's kind of like the Botvinnik formation of the English, and he's created this hole on D4, and the way that Black plays that is he'll castle, then knight will go on F6, goes to E8 to C7 to E6, and then Black is all poised to occupy D4 with a knight. And anyway, we'll get to that. I'll play knight F6 here, and we'll wait developments. Okay, so white to play, and candidate moves for him, aside from knight f3, would be, like I say, e4, a3 is a candidate move, because then I can't play d5 yet, and at some point I may have to abandon d5 if he delays the development of his king's knight and goes about some other operations, and there's another operation right there. Okay, so in this case I have to be careful. Maybe d5 is entirely out of the question. And the reason I say that is that, let's just suppose that I castle and he plays knight f3. I can't play d5 because he takes on f6, and I take back with the bishop, and then d5 hangs. So I think bishop g5 is a little premature for him, and I don't remember exact theory on it, but I know enough about this type of position to know how to approach that if I just sit here and discuss it with you, which is what I'm going to do. Okay, so I can play h6, and this puts the question to him right away. What this says is, if you take my knight, I'm going to take the bishop. I'm going to take your bishop, and I've got the bishop pair. That's what it says. Now it comes at a small price for me. Let's just suppose he does take, and I take back with the bishop. Okay. Now what he could do is play queen d2, and the purpose of queen d2 is multifold. What he's first doing is he's stopping me from castling, because my h6 would hang, and I would have to endure another tempo loss to have acquired the bishop pair by playing bishop g7. Then I can castle safely. And at the same time, what he's saying is that with this is that he wants to castle queenside and start a pawn roller on the king side. And maybe because I've opened up with h6, that he thinks he can get h4 and h5 in. So when he plays h4 in that type of formation, I might be obligated to play h5 to stop it. Now, none of this is forced. He doesn't have any clear advantage out of it. It's something that Black would play for. He'd play the strategy and just say, okay, I've got the bishop. Now I'll have to play the middle game and justify that owning the two bishops is fine. So myself, in a lot of these English positions, sometimes what I do with either side is I will actually trade my queen's bishop for the knight, and I've recognized that it's an okay thing to do, and I do it with either white or black in a symmetrical English. Myself, I'm comfortable with it. I've found that I can do things with my knights that will compensate for the fact that I don't have the bishop. So it takes a couple tempos away from my game to stop and take that bishop. Now, if I play h6, he's not necessarily going to take it either. He could come back, say, to e3. Now, what does that do? Well, I could kick it again if I wanted with knight g4. I could, but basically he's saying, aside from that, he's saying if I castle, he will play queen d2, inviting me to play king h7 to guard my pawn, and then he'll castle queenside and try and launch his kingside attack. But I should have resources against that. I believe that unless he brings the bishop all the way back to d2, that I can trade my knight off for his bishop eventually, and putting it on d2 takes away the idea of his to castle queenside, although he still could, but he won't be able to do it with as much firepower. He can't. Queen c1 would menace h6, but it gets in the way of him castling. And I think what's important, since I'm doing these things for instructional value, is to go ahead and to play into these lines, see which one he picks, and justify my reasoning. Now, of course, if he wants to trade bishop for knight, or I can just castle and not even spend a tempo. But at the same time, well, maybe what he's planning is also, if I castle, that he'll play queen d2. I'll do a developing move, and he'll play bishop h6 and then exchange off. A lot of people at the lower rating levels, like he's at, like to do this. And it's not necessarily a great strategy, but they like to do it. I guess they just feel that if they're trading off somebody's fianchetto bishop, they've accomplished something. So I'm going to go slightly on the defensive, and because my development will suffer just a little bit from doing it by acquiring the bishop pair, but I want to acquire it just to try to lure him into taking it and showing you how to play with your down a tempo or two. Okay, so now he's played bishop d2. Now, that, as I said, that takes away a lot of his motifs that he might want. I was suggesting he might want to play queen d2 so that he could castle long. So he can still menace my pawn if I castle, but he does it with queen c1, and there's a big difference. He's not able to castle queenside, and then we don't have a potential attack that I get to defend against and show you how to defend against those attacks. So castling here is a perfectly logical move, and it preserves the idea, if he plays knight f3, that I can play d5. See, d6 is a candidate move, but it's not necessarily the best candidate move, because I want to be able to play d5 in one move if I can do it. And since he's probably going to castle kingside now, it's just good for me to go ahead and castle and get it over and done with. Okay, so, and he played queen c1. Okay, that's fine. I don't mind. Like I say, I have king h7 planned. Now, how is he going to continue? That's the question. Would he continue with h4? It's kind of risky, because he's not getting his development going. So clearly, as I've shown, his intention was to get lined up on that long diagonal and try and trade off. Well, he played it. Okay, so how do we handle something like this? Okay, I can play h5, which is fine, except a couple potential drawbacks. It does weaken g5, and he has the opportunity to play then play knight g5 check. But that's not so bad, because, okay, let me try to illustrate it this way. He's played h4. If I play h5, he can play knight f3 or knight h3. Let's just have him play knight h3. The reason is that it just keeps his bishop diagonal open. Okay, now, even if he plays knight f3, I can probably forget about playing d5. But I'll just go ahead with d6. Now he gives a check on g5, and has he really accomplished that much? No, I just go back to g8. And what's White's attack like? Okay, it's kind of halted in its own under its own weight. I have free development, and I have a counterpart, g4. I have that square under my control, and it's going to be hard for him to get the break of pawn g4 in. It can be done, but I have ample time to thwart that off. Now, the other alternative is, do I just allow him to play h5? Okay, that's definitely a possibility. Okay, do I want him to play h5? Let's talk about that. In other words, I could continue my development and let him play h5 instead of stopping to play h5 myself. Let's talk about that. Okay, if I play d6, he may or may not go for the sacrifice. Okay, so if he plays h5, I can take it with the knight. Now, he's got an open file now. So what would he do next? Well, if he could drive the knight away, he could come down and be taking on h6, right? So how does he do that? Well, he doesn't right at the moment. If he plays g4, I just take his pawn. So he's got to slow play it with f3. Although then he might run into some trouble with knight takes g3, and I'm on his rook, and he's trying to get rid of that knight. But so, like I say, I'm tempted just to play d6 here, invite him to go ahead and do it. But he has one other possibility that I have to defend against, and I'll show you that. Okay, h5, I play knight takes h5, and he gives up the exchange with rook takes h5. Now that exposes my king slightly. There's a diagonal, but I really don't need to worry about that. Okay, he has bishop e4 check. Well, I just play pawn f5 myself, and I'm on his bishop. And his bishop has to retreat, probably put it on f3 for sake of any place else. But then I have all kinds of good moves here. I can play queen e8, which holds on to h5, and if he tries knight h3 with the idea of knight f4, further menacing h5, I have e5, and I've kept him out of that square. And plus, I'm ready to play knight d4 on my own. So I'm going to invite. I want to be illustrative. I'm going to invite him to attack me, and I'm going to work on my development. So h5 is a viable move for black here, but let's go ahead and let white attack. But if I get my development done, he has to take the risk of attacking. So I'm just going to develop my pieces, play d6, and let him decide how he's going to proceed here, because I think it's risky for him to make any kind of a sacrifice this early in the game. And again, if you're afraid of anyone's attack, as long as you're developing, you should be able to find a defense, because it's just too early in the game for white to be able to have a forced win in 9 moves of an English opening, which is only maybe 2 moves removed from theory. So I'm inviting him to play h5. And again, now how else will I proceed? If he goes for knight f3 and decides that there's no attack worth pursuing, I can further work on my development. I can bring up my bishop. I can put the bishop on g4, which is a perfectly good square. It further thwarts him from pushing h5, because I'll just take back with the bishop and go from there. Although that does open up the h file a little bit. The bishop can't move because he would have bishop takes h6. But he's kind of in a dilemma. He'd like to castle queenside here, but he's arranged his queen and bishop so that he can't. And if he does go to castle queenside, he takes his queen out of play doing so. And the queen is not able to shift back over to the king side easily. Queen c2, castles, king b1, queen back to c1, then it's finally back where it wanted to be. And that gives me plenty of time to bring my guys out. So, okay, he played bishop h3. Okay, now he's willing to make some exchanges. Okay, now, do I want to exchange? Well, they say only exchange when it develops. News of it says only exchange when it develops your pieces. Okay, so if I take on h3, then I'm developing one of his pieces, his knight on g1. So I don't really want to take. Now his knight is in the way of, or let me rephrase that. His bishop is in the way of his knight that might want to get to h3. Now, so logically what I should do here is make an exchange that helps me. And one that would help me is if he developed my queen. Okay, so for instance, what I'm looking at as a candidate move is just to play e5 here. The purpose of that is that if he wants to trade that bishop so bad, let him go ahead and take it. And now I take back with the queen. Now my queen's on a much more active diagonal. And yeah, he can play knight h3, and he is threatening knight g5 check, but I have resources. Okay, I have resources in this position. I can start finding good moves. Okay, one of them that comes to mind is just queen g4. Now if he checks on g5, I can take with the knight, right? I'm sorry, h takes g5. Now he takes the discovered check. H takes g5, and then I play knight h5, and his attack is ground to a screeching halt. He's given up. He's given up what? A piece to do this, right? and he doesn't really have a useful follow-up. And my queen is very nicely posted on g4, and if I back my king up, I can be threatening a sacrifice of my own on g3 maybe, and a knight follow-up to d4 looks good, and he can't kick it out with e3 because I get knight f3 check in. So what I'm going to do is I will play just e5, stake a share in the center, restrain some of his pawns. I'm not too worried if he gets a knight in on d5. That's the least of my worry. I can deal with that. And I want the diagonal open. I'm happy to trade light squared bishops, but I want to do so where it improves my development, not his. Okay, so let's just think one more second here and decide what are my other candidate moves. Well, I could play knight g4 here, but if he plays f3, then where's my knight go? I guess it goes back to f6. It could go to e5, but I don't see much future there. And now I've taken away from his knight, but I haven't really. His bishop is still blocking his knight's development because the pawn on f3 is taken away from his knight, but we can still go about the same way with bishop takes c8 and queen takes c8, and then he plays knight h3. But the difference is I don't have a pawn on e5, so kicking up the knight up to g5 just to try to avoid exchanges doesn't seem good. Another idea is to play bishop g4 here, and with similar ideas, saying that if you take on g4, I'll improve the position of my knight. But once again, he could just kick the bishop with f3, and I'm stuck to taking on h3 and developing his knight. So therefore, e5 is my move. One other thing before I play it. Could I consider a move like knight h5? Not really. He could play g4 there, and he's prepared to do it. Okay, because he's got a bishop supporting it. He may, and he can't play g4 in this position. So I'll just play e5 and allow him to exchange and improve my queen's position. And nothing wrong with the queen on d8, but I think on c8 it has a little better mobility here, especially if the white squared bishops are traded. The white squares are weak and inaccessible, and my queen can more or less move on them unopposed. So we'll see what his plan is from here. I don't know what it is yet exactly. I've given some ideas, but you see he's still far removed from castling, and he may never castle unless he realizes there's nothing else going in here and finally goes ahead and castles. But to do that, he's going to have to trade bishops off first because he can't move his knight, and I'm certainly not going to develop his knight for him. He's going to have to move his knight on his own, and if he moves his knight to f3 here, then I have bishop takes bishop, and he can never castle. Okay, so now he has played e4, and now I've got permanent residency on d4 if I want. I think that's a tremendous square to have, and I'm going to take it. And I'm not so much worried about him going to d5 because I'm opposing that. Notice if I play knight d5 here, if I play knight d4 here, he can't move his king knight. Now I have a threat. Now I'm actually threatening to take his bishop, and he wants to take with his knight, but he can't because I would have knight f3 check, and then I'll take off his bishop on d2 that he's trying to use to attack my king. Although that might be possible for him, and it would actually help his development and help him get castle queenside, so I may not even want to do that. But knight to d4 just screams to be played here because if he plays something like knight e2, I might just play knight f3 check, and once he gets out of check, I'll just let the knight sit there, and I won't even take on d2, and my knight's just in his way, and it's going to be a huge nuisance to him. So, and again, if he plays his knight to d5, I'll happily exchange it, and I'll be fine. Okay, so knight d4, and we go from here. Okay, it's his move. I've got 34 minutes left. I've got plenty of time, and we're going to use that time as wisely as we can. And hopefully I'll be able to say quite a lot in those 34 minutes. Now, what are his candidate moves? Again, I don't mind if he plays bishop takes c8 because I'll take it back with my queen, and my queen rules that diagonal. I don't mind if he brings his c knight to e2. That's not a problem. I'm liable to just take it, and then if he takes with his knight, then I take his bishop, and he can't castle. So, as I was saying, he may never be able to castle, and then a few timely exchanges, and then I can maybe open up some lines and go after his king, which is caught in the center. If my king knight moves, I'm very close to getting f5 in, and if he wants to try for f4 at some point, which he might, that will reopen the diagonal for my bishop, and that's on g7. That's not very active right now, and it can't be active. It's busy defending h7. I'm sorry, h6. So we wait for white to move. What would I do if I was white here? Well, I probably wouldn't have this position, but if I was white here, I'd hate to improve the black game with bishop takes c8, but it's pretty much the only logical thing to do now. He's kind of limited in some of his options, and another way is to slow play it with f3, just to take away g4 from me, and then maybe you can't even run the king to the queen side. You know, king can go to d1, but it can't get to c2. That's covered. Knight cd2 is one idea. Just to, he's going to say that the queen's knights were useless here, and we'll just plug the holes on d5. I'll take it. I'll take your knight, and oh, he played h5. Okay, he's willing to sacrifice. So, okay, so now I just have to find a useful plan here. If I play knight takes h5, what's his follow-up? Okay, if he plays bishop takes c8, I play queen takes c8, and okay, or maybe he's playing to sack on h6. I just saw an idea. Bishop takes h6, bishop takes h6. Now he doesn't have enough here. g4, the knight goes to f4, and he's trying to get some kind of a pin on the bishop on h6, and he doesn't have it. But I think h5 just helps me. Because I take it with my knight, and if he plays g4, then my knight comes into f4, and I just basically no, wait, he can't play g4. Yeah, he can play g4. Okay, g4. I play knight f4. Now, this allows him to win the pawn back, but at a price. He loses his d2 bishop, which is helping his attack. So bishop takes f4, pawn takes f4, and now if he plays queen takes f4, if anything, I can go knight c2 check, and he just doesn't have enough of an attack to justify giving up the exchange, because after king d1, knight takes a1, my knight will eventually be lost, and he just doesn't have enough here. So he's kind of playing a little speculative here, hoping something will go wrong. But all I'm doing is making logical moves and showing you how to defend against an attack. I just have to make sure I don't make a mistake, or I don't think I've made one yet. I mean, I'm capable of making a mistake. Anybody is. But I just don't see how he has enough firepower to crack me open. So knight takes h5. It opens up the h file, but he's not ready to use it, and he won't be for a little while yet. So I guess he'll show me what's wrong with it if I made a mistake in my analysis, but I don't see. Okay, knight takes h5. Now black's upon ahead, and white's still trying to attack. And a lot of things still go that went before. He can't. If he plays knight Ge2, I have a check on f3, and if he in some cases I'm actually threatening to play f5 now. f5 followed by f4, and shutting his queenside pieces, his queen and bishop, out of the game. So if there's a good way to refute an attack, it's just to make logical moves like this. And his h5 was speculative and illogical. I don't know, but everyone plays chess differently. I'm not criticizing him. You don't know these things until you play them out. But if you have this type of game played against you and you don't have experience, you don't necessarily know what to do. Well, I'm trying to show you what to do here. And really, the black game is starting to look very, very, very nice. Forget the pawn plus, but what's his activity? He's just got pressure on h6 and indirect pressure on the h-file, which is half open in his favor. But now, one of the ways to handle a wing attack is to strike in the center. And I've already struck in the center. I've got my knight on d4. It's there. It's not going anywhere. And my next center strike will be f5. And I'm going to get all kinds of activity if I'm allowed to get f5 in. As I said, then the idea is to push to f4 and just shut his attack down cold. And then we start looking for new ways to open up the game. Eventually, if I lock up the king side, oh god, he played it. Okay, well, I can't fault him for playing it, but I don't see his follow-up. I play knight f4, and he just can't take it twice. He can't take twice on f4 because he's going to drop his rook, and he doesn't have enough of an attack going on the king side to justify it. So there he did. Okay, come on. He took it. Now he's shut his bishop out of the game. His bishop on h3 is shut out. He could try g5 here, but that's fine. I just push by with h5. So one of his best attacking pieces is now out of the game. That was his bishop on d2. That's traded off. He doesn't have that anymore. And what am I threatening? Well, g5. G5 threatens to just keep the pawn on f4. My bishop diagonal just opened up, so now that's a piece that's going to come into play. He's allowed that, so I'm going to get g5 in. Now, I'm also prepared to play f5 at some point, but I may not want to if it means dropping the pawn back on f4. I can hang on to that pawn and be fine. Okay, knight e2. Now I have a check which displaces his king, and then I can play, let's see, so let's just calculate this out. So the idea of a check is I'm going to take away castling from him once and for all. But then the follow-up is that he either goes to d1 or f1. I don't know which one he's going to go to. My follow-up is that then I'm playing g5, and he doesn't have a capture on f4 unless he wants to sacrifice another piece. Then my plan is to bring the knight on f3 to e5, where it puts two attackers on g4, and he can't play f3 because I would take that pawn. So it looks perfectly logical. Let's see if I have anything else that's a good candidate move. Okay, I could play f3 here, and I'm not saying that's a good move or a bad move yet, but I could play it. Okay, the point is, if I play it, he can no longer take it with his queen, right? Okay, and if he takes my knight on on d4. I can take back with the bishop. Now I got to be careful because h6 is loose, but he's not primed to go after it. The only way to go after it would be bishop f1, and then if anything I can come back to g7 or push g5, and that just seems kind of ugly. It's a possible move, but I like it's a possible plan that I'm attacking g4, but it just seems like, okay, bishop f1, then I play bishop g7. Now his g4 square is hanging, so he pushes it to g5 because there's a pin, and I push to h5 and his attack is over. And then he tries to surround my pawn on f3 and win it back, because if he wins it back he's restored material equality. My bishops are active in this line. That's one reason I'm liking looking at it. And I have stopped his attack stone cold. But I'm bound to have some resources here. Of course, I could always take on d4 with my pawn instead of my bishop, and that tempos his knight. So let's see. Yeah, f3 may not be a bad move. G5 is fine. F3 is fine. Seems to be fine too. So now I get to make up my mind and share with you how I think about these things. Okay. So, a computer engine, it sees these things and it knows before a millisecond is up. It knows what the best move is. A human, you have to stop and look at things, and I can see things quicker if I don't have to stop and explain them, because my mind works a little quicker than my mouth moves. But okay, f3. If he plays knight takes d4, I play c takes d4 instead, which gains a tempo on his knight. So where is he going to put his knight? I guess he's going to put it on d5. Now I'm not primed to eliminate that knight, so now he's got a powerful knight. So let's see. My knight, which was on f6, was the thing that was going to get rid of it. So I guess that's the price of winning a pawn. He's going to get d5 in either case. But I can always do things. So knight d5. Now I have queen a4 check for what it's worth. Queen a4 check. Does that do any good? Where's he going to go with his king? Because if he plays queen d2, he's just giving up. He's just letting me trade queens, and I have a nice ending. Although it's my pawn on f3 could run into some trouble eventually. I don't have a whole lot of support for it. That's not clear exactly how he goes and surrounds it yet either, because he's got pawn problems. Oh, this is such a happy dilemma when you have two nice moves. They both look good. Let me go back and think of the other one for a moment, then I can make a better evaluation. And that's what you do. You look at candidate moves, and you figure out what's best, and then you compare them against each other and say, which one do I like the best? Which one gives me the best winning chances? Or if you're barely hanging on, which one gives me the least losing chances? Which one gives me the best chances to trick him? You have to make all these evaluations, and as humans we have to stop and take our time and determine that, and a computer engine decides them in seconds. Okay, or less. Okay, so let's see. Knight f3 check. The thing I like about that is it just puts that knight in his way, and I like to keep pieces on when I can. And that's precisely what this move does. And so either it goes to d1 or c1. I'm sorry, d1 or f1. I'm going to put him on d1 so that maybe the king can go to c2 and at some point and finally get some relief. Then I play g5, right? That was what I was saying. And the idea, I could even play queen g5. If I play, well, no, I'm not, can't. He's on f4 twice. Okay. I was trying to activate the queen. Okay, g5 stops him cold. And now my threat is to play knight e5, which attacks two pawns. The pawn on d3 and the pawn on g4. So for instance, if he plays knight d5, I play knight e5, and that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm attacking two pawns, and one of them has to fall. And okay, I'm gonna play the check and just stop him from castling and get it over with. Okay, knight f3 check. So he's got two legal moves here, and my next move is going to be g5. I could pre-move it, but I want to stop and think for a second. Okay, he's attacking f4 twice, and I'm not defending it at all, but I will be defending it with g5, so that's my move. And that's how we've based this entire thing. The only thing is I could play knight e5 here and allow him knight takes f4 and then take on g4, and that just exchanges pawns. So let's think about it for a second before I make the move. I'm going to say, let's see, if I play knight e5, I'm threatening two pawns. And so he takes on f4. Now which way would I take on g4? With my bishop or my knight? Well, the knight's on a great square. Why take with it? I could take with the bishop. And now he finally developed my bishop. And if he takes with his bishop, I take, and now I have an outside pass pawn. And he's crawling all over d5. He's got two knights in there, so he's got permanent residence of d5, but that's all right. His king's misplaced. I have a very good position. I got to be careful. I might be able to play bishop d4 in here, and I'm going to be the one attacking his king in a minute. And queen g5 is certainly a possibility. And even if he sinks a knight in on d5, it's not that bad. So let me compare this with pawn g5. Okay. On pawn g5, he could play king g2 and attack my knight. And let me think about this. Again, it's two good moves to play from, and just have to. You can't be like I told this fable before, the donkey that was stuck between two tasty piles of oats, and he kept looking at them both and just couldn't make up his mind which one to eat. They both looked so yummy, and while he was busy making up his mind, time passed, and he finally starved to death. So in my case, I would run out of time. So knight e5 allows knight takes f4, but what else could he do? He could play g5. I'm not so worried about that. I can take his bishop, and his rook retakes, and I develop my queen with queen to d7, and he doesn't have time to sack on h6. So he has to deal with his rook. He could do that by knight takes f4. Now his rook is guarded, and I don't have a whole lot there. I can play h5, and he doesn't have enough with a sack, and I'm no longer. So g5 is an interesting move. I'm thinking if I play knight e5, I'm kind of liking to play knight e5, but he has g5, and that's what bothers me, is that he actually has a good move. Okay, so let me think about this a little more. Sometimes I can't talk, and if I keep talking, I'll just talk myself right out of seeing an obvious move. So hang on. So if I don't talk for a moment, then gives you guys a chance to think while I'm thinking. G5 keeps his bishop shut in, and he's going to have to deal with the threat of knight e5. So knight e5 forks 2 pawns. So if he plays king g2, for instance, attacking my knight, then I play knight e5, and I'm attacking 2 pawns. So he could play queen d1, for instance, and then when I play knight e5, he's got d3 covered, but he doesn't have g4 covered. Now he can cover that by his knight to c1. That looks horrible. Knight to g1, that's where it came from. And I just put another attacker on it, and or rook g1, then I play h5. Okay, g5 is the move. Knight e5 is interesting, but g5 is the move. Okay, let's see what he does. And I say my threat now is knight e5, winning a second pawn, and he's going to have to deal with it. So he doesn't really have a good move here. His attack has just been ground to a screeching halt in just a few moves. Okay, knight d5, and I guess he just didn't see what I have in mind here. Knight e5 forks 2 pawns. He can sack on f4, a piece for 2 pawns, but I don't think he has enough. Okay, so knight e5, and show me your stuff. Okay, he's got 2 pawns under attack. d3 and g4. And if he sacks twice on, or sacks on f4, there's a good chance I can get away with playing queen g5 here. And if he trades queens, he can't do anything with the discovery because his bishop can only go backward. Okay, queen d2, or c2. Now, which way do I want to take? I've already discussed this. I think I said I was going to take with the bishop just to get it developed and keep my knight on the board. So, for instance, there's a tactic here. Bishop takes g4. If he takes bishop takes g4, I take knight takes g4, and now he can't play f3 because of knight e3 check winning the world. Okay, so let's see. I believe the correct move here is to play bishop takes g4, and then I'm going to follow it up eventually with more moves, including and not limited to pawn f5. Okay, so it's better to take with the bishop, and as I said, I don't mind trading those bishops because I end up ruling the white squares, and I will be on those white squares. So bishop takes g4, and I don't think he has enough. So I've taken a second pawn, and he has to justify his position here. Okay, so he took with the bishop. Now I take back with the knight. And what's his next step? He can't play f3. Oh, he did play f3. Well, you know what? I was wrong. It doesn't fork him. But I can get this tremendous pass pawn and get rid of his knight on d5 all in one shot. So I miscalculated that, but he does have a great knight on d5. So question is, do I want to let him keep it there and use my knight, or do I want to trade it off? Now, when you're 2 pawns ahead, logic always says just keep trading pieces, because eventually you'll have a king and 2 pawns versus a king, right? Well, it's not always that easy, because getting all those pieces off, you have to make sure that while you're getting those pieces off that they don't go and do something to you, right? So a lot of times when you're materially ahead, you want to keep pieces on the board. And the reason you want to keep pieces on the board is because if you have a good position, you can do things with your good pieces that he can't. So let's think a moment about what I can do here, and before we just rush to exchange. And see, I can see one idea that's running through my head already. If I just put my knight back on f3, guess what? I'm attacking his pawn again, right? So he can't afford to give me another pawn, right? Okay, so then he plays what? He plays king f2, king g. Let's just go to f2. It could go to g2, but for the sake of this, I'll put it on f2. Now I have the interesting move knight c6, and I'm planning to put the knight in on d4, and I'm saying to him that you'll have a nice knight on d5, but I'm going to have a great bishop on d4, and my bishop will be better on d4 for me than your knight will be on e5 or d5 for you. That's kind of like the logic. So eventually it will lead to a trade of pieces, and I'll have that bishop there, and like I say, in this case it would be with check, so he could be on g2, but on g2 he's getting in the way of his rooks. So for instance, in this position he could play, after knight c6, he could play rook a g1, then I play knight d4, and he can't take my knight, because if he does, he gets hurdled. His king moves and he drops his rook, so his queen has to stop and move. We put him back on d2, and he's not threatening g5 because my queen guards it, so I just take his knight on e2, and he takes with his king to avoid the hurdle, and I stick my bishop on g4, and now I'm attacking his rook, and he brings his rook up to g4. Now the queen side is all locked, and I'm 2 pawns ahead, and they're on the king side, and to win this, I've got to advance those pawns on the king side, and suddenly he's active there. So it's going to take a while, but I'll win this. This is based on the idea of knight e5 to c6 to d4. Now let's take a look at the idea of making him trade knights on e3 and get rid of his great knight on d5. Okay, let's take a look at that and see if there's any major difference or not, because that will determine which move I play. Okay, so let's see, where's his... I'm looking at this on a board on the side and moving my head back and forth. Okay, so if I play knight e3 check, he must take on e3. I take back on e3. Now I've got this wonderful passed pawn. Now he can still get a knight to d5, but I have now time to play f5, and I'm threatened to open up the position. And this is a big difference. I didn't necessarily have it in the other variation, because here I've opened up the f file, and I like this. And if he goes and attacks my pawn on e3, I can always put the bishop on d4, and there's not much you can do about it. Okay, let me just double check one thing. Could I have opened up the f file on the other line? I want to answer that before I make a move. Let's see. I was playing, what was I playing? I was playing knight e5, right? And then I was attacking f2, right? And then we were playing the king to f2. Now do I have, well, I have f5, but the file doesn't open up. The f file doesn't open up. My pawn going to e3 opens up the f file. So knight fork it is, and he has to take. And I'll pre-move it, because that's what he has to do. Now I'm ready for f5. Of course, he could play knight g3 here, but I'm not too worried about that. I could probably even sacrifice the exchange here or make new threats against him. I can play Queen A5, and the queen's trying to run down to D2, which would force him to trade queens and give me a pawn on the 7th rank. That pawn on E3 is a nuisance to him. There's not a lot he can do here, and knight G3 is just a little slow for him. It's the only way for him to stop F5, but I have some good resources here. That was one thing I forgot to say. So knight G3 is his best move, but Queen A5 just hurts him, and well, he could play Rook D1. But then I just increase the pressure with Queen B4 and threaten to come in. And you know, if he gets a knight on B5, or F5, it's not doing him all that much good. I just have a 2-pawn advantage, and I can probably even find a way to give up the exchange and still be winning this. So, but I like this better than the other line, because the other line the pawns would get locked up, and my advantage would be my H and my G pawn, and that looked like a long way to win. And here the board opens up, and there's plenty of chances for some activity. So that's one of the reasons why I would prefer. I prefer to go this way rather than the other, simply because the board opens up and there's more possibilities. So like I say, knight G3 is his best move, and I play Queen A5. And if he plays one risk of playing Rook D1 is I can just go grab his A pawn, and he doesn't have any compensation for it, and he'd be down a 3rd pawn. Okay, he played knight C6 or C3, and I don't think that really helps. Okay, I play F5, and I'm threatening to take on E5 or E4 and just open up everything. It can open up the diagonal towards my king eventually, but he doesn't have much of a follow-up here. Okay, so F5, I'm just saying, for example, he could play D4. Well, you can't really do that. It just hangs a pawn. But if he takes and I take, if he takes on F5 and I take, then he plays D4. Now my rook is pinned, but he's not able to take advantage of that too conveniently. I'll play Queen F6, and then he has, I don't want to play Queen F6, he has Knight D4. Well, that's alright. Maybe he doesn't, then he's threatening to go back to G3. So on F5, takes on F5, and he plays D4. I just play the quiet Queen F8. And he doesn't have a tempo with his knight, but he needs to get something else in play. So if he plays King E2, he's cut off communication of his queen from the king side. And my point is, I'm going to be able to play King G8 here in a moment, and F2 is in trouble. So no matter where his king goes to help out, his king's getting tied up, and his D4 pawn is still hanging. And yeah, F5 is my move. He just doesn't have enough. And if anything, I can probably even just push to F4, but I like opening up the position if I can. F4 would just give him another heartbreak. So here White tried to attack on the king side, and look who's attacking on the king side. It's me. Okay, King E2. So I'm 2 pawns up. I can give one back to open him up. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Let's see. Okay, for instance, if I play F takes E4, he has several recaptures at his disposal. I don't think him taking on E3 with his king is wise. I'll just, if anything, take with my pawn on F3, and I've got 3 connected pass pawns, and his king's in trouble. So if he takes with the knight, I can go park my bishop on d4, and well, I don't even have to park it there. I can just probably sacrifice it. Well, no, I mean not sacrifice it. I mean sacrifice the pawn on a3, then check on d4. So let's see. Don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on here. I could play bishop takes c3, just get rid of my bad bishop, that because I'm not really going to need it, and he has the better minor piece. And then he plays queen takes c3, and then I play f4, and I've got this tremendous pawn chain. And next I'm going to play queen f6, and he can't exchange, and now just start winning stuff. Yeah, I'm going to take his knight, and then I'm going to push f4. I don't think I have enough to try to open him up for an attack. So this should be a pretty routine win. My bishop's kind of clumsy with all those pawns on black squares, so I'll just trade it off and use my queen on the black squares. Be much more effective. And I could take with the pawn. Like I say, I mean I'm just dying to play f4 here, but I'm saying I could take with my pawn on e4 and try and open him up. Let's see. If he takes with the d pawn, now my d6 pawn is weak. I can play queen f6, threatening f3 and offering a queen trade, but then I'm only coming out of that a pawn ahead, and he's got an active target. Now I'll just play f4 and let him show me what he's got, which is nothing. So he could play rook ag1, threatening. He's not threatening on g5, but it would prevent queen f6 because we trade queens and he takes on g5. But I would still be winning that. Yeah, he's just kind of hurting here. He's down 2 clear pawns, and the net result of his kingside attack is that I won 2 pawns, and there they are, h6 and g5. And this is better than the earlier variations. I've gotten all the minor pieces off, so he no longer has a great minor piece that could help him out on the d5 square. And I just have to slowly, carefully consolidate my position, and the game is mine. So I say if rook dg1, I can't play queen f6 right away because he would trade queens and then grab the pawn on g5, but I would still be winning that from that position. Be basically routine. But I can just play king g6, and there's really nothing he can do. He doesn't have a sacrifice on h6 at his disposal, so he can play rook h3, and I play queen f3, and he'd love to play queen e1, but then I get queen takes b2 check in, so his queen's just not helping him. And I'll open up some more lines here somewhere real quick. a6 and b5, and it's curtains. He still really hasn't spent much time on the game. See who's watching. Anybody watching? There weren't watching last time I looked. Nope, nobody's watching. Good. We have it all to ourselves. Okay, so I didn't really do anything out of the ordinary here. I just found some logical moves, and as a result of looking for some logical moves and weighing them against each other, suddenly I'm 2 pawns ahead. What did I do special? Now just look at the score sheet here on the record. Scroll up. I kicked his bishop back, I castled, I guarded my pawn, I played d6 to get my bishop into play, played e5 to take out a share of the center, put a knight on d4 centralizing it, move 12, I took a pawn he offered, Move 13, I advanced my knight to a better square, recaptured on move 14, gave a check, protected a pawn on f4 with g5, put a knight on e5 to attack a couple of pawns, traded a bishop, grabbed a pawn, exchanged knights on e3, took back on e3, shoved f5 to open up the board, and traded my bishop for his knight. I didn't do anything special here. I really didn't. All I did was determine that his moves were mistakes, and I found the best move to answer them. Okay, so he played as I expected. He played rook dg1, and as I say, I can play queen f6 here and give up a pawn, but there's really no need to. That just lets him back in the game. I could play from here rook, I could do it, then play rook g8. I'm just looking at it. What does he do? He can't move his rook off the file, because if he does, I play rook g2 check, and I'm picking up another pawn. So he has to trade rooks. I mean, it might be worth it just to do it and get into a winning ending. Okay, so then from this position, the threat I have is rook to g6, followed by king to g7, and if he stops and plays king f1, I have rook g3, and he's in deep trouble. So it's almost worth it to do this. He's almost in a quickly losing ending. So sometimes, I talk about when you're playing, don't be sloppy. You see a move that wins and you play it, and maybe you had better. What I like about this is that it just seems to put him in a position he can't do anything from, and it seems to lead to a quick win. The alternative is that I keep the extra pawn and play move my king so that he's now doesn't have a threat on g5 after the queens are traded. So, I can afford to sacrifice a pawn because I'm gonna win it back, it seems. Okay, so the alternative is I can play something like king g6, and I have to be careful because h6 isn't guarded. Now it's going to take him a while to do something. His queen certainly isn't positioned to come in and help. But what's my follow-up? Okay, let's just suppose he plays rook h2. Well, and the reason I'm doing that is to guard his second rank and get ready to double. Then I play queen f6. Now he ignores it with queen e1. Whoops! I have queen takes. I have queen takes b2, so he can't go to e1. He's got to go to c1. So that's still a problem for him. Now, what's my follow-up? Like I was saying earlier, my follow-up is to open up files on the queen side. Well, one nice thing about opening up or giving back the pawn is I don't have to stop and open up files. I have one opened up on the king side, and I'm ready to use it. So that makes a big difference, and is a good reason why I might want to just sacrifice the pawn and get this game over with. Okay, so queen f6, he takes, I take, and he takes on g5, and he's all happy as a clam. But then I play, like I say, rook g8, and he can't go off the file. If he plays rook d5 or rook d5 or rook g to h5, I have rook g2 check, and I'm killing him. So he has to trade rooks. And what does he do next? He has a check with his rook, that's fine. But, okay, now if he comes up to g4, he's really not going to penetrate too far into my position. This is his best shot. I have h5, and then rook g5, and it can get messy here. Let's see. I have 13 minutes left. It's awful close to just going into a position that he's just has no good moves in. That's what's so tempting about it. But I'm trying to play devil's advocate and find good moves for white. Okay, so on, like I say, on rook takes g5, I play rook g8. He takes, I take, and I say he gives a check. And then I play king f7, and he has rook g4. Okay, so now how do I follow this up? He's definitely got an active rook. If I play h5, he plays rook g5. And if I play rook h6 and he plays rook f5 check, king e6, rook takes f4. Now I play h4. Now the problem is, I think his rook gets back in time. He doesn't have time for king e3 because of h3, king f2, 8, yeah. He has to play rook g4, and then I play h3, rook g1, h2, rook h1, king e5, and he plays king takes e3, and suddenly I'm down a pawn. I've gone from up 2 pawns to down 1 pawn. I've given up too many pawns. Okay, so as much as I'd like to do it, I can't. I'm just going to play king g6 and let him suffocate. Trying, well, yeah, king g6. He can't do anything to me. Even if he finally gets a queen somehow to h5 with check, all I have to do is batten down the hatches and cover h6, and he's not going anywhere. Okay, so king g6 it is. So my idea was clever, but he had some play. But the only way you find out is to analyze. And if I miss something, then I just missed a faster win, but this will still win. It just takes time. He's still going to have trouble dealing with queen f6 because it offers a queen trade and it puts pressure on b2, and he just can't let me come down to the 7th rank on him. It'll be deadly. And you know what? I have all 8 of my pawns still. How rare is that, to go into a late middle game with all 8 of your pawns? He hasn't captured a single one yet. He sacrificed one, and I won the other. So, which pawn will he take of mine first? It's a good question. I don't know. Okay, so I have 11 minutes left. My next move, most likely, is queen f6, but not necessarily. Queen b3, queen f6, queen takes b7, rook fb8, queen d5, rook takes b2 check. What's he threatening I should worry about? Absolutely nothing. Rook takes a6, king takes h6, rook h1 check, king h1, and then his queen runs over to h7 check. There might be some tricks in here for him. Did you follow all that? Okay. Just something I have to be on the lookout for. Okay, queen b3, queen f6, queen takes b2, rook fb8, queen d7, rook takes b2 check, king back. Well, I'll go trade a set of rooks. That's what I'll do. I won't just gobble another pawn. I'll trade a set of rooks so he can't sack on h7. Rook b1 check, king up, rook takes b2, or rook takes g1, and he's toast. Or even better, after rook b1 check, if king f2, queen b2 is mate. So queen f6 just embarrasses him. He can't do much. And the video is now 1 hour and 14 minutes long. For those of you that like long videos, here you go. And again, like I say, what did I do special? I didn't come up with any brilliant move. I just basically played the position. He made mistakes, he made risky moves, and I found the best reply. So sometimes, I've said before, when you're playing a game of chess, sometimes you don't see yourself winning the game, you see the other guy losing the game. And kind of that's what's happened here, but I had to find the winning moves. Some people can't find the winning moves. If he gets this position against someone rated 1389, as opposed to my rating, then he's going to get away with some of his things because they're not going to find the moves that I did. They're going to go make other moves that don't get them developed, that don't defend in the spirit of things and so forth. So that's the trouble that they run into. Now, question: does he have D4 here? Again, I'll go pin it. I'll play queen F6. So queen F6 is just going to start getting embarrassing for him here. My queen is getting ready to come in, although he can hold on. Eventually, I'll prop a file or two open on the queen file, even if that's how I have to win it. I will get it done. Something is going to open up somewhere. Say queen E1. Now, like I say, he's got problems. Queen F6, queen H4, queen takes B2 check, and I think he gets mated. Yeah, he gets mated. So queen F6. Now he has to stop and guard B2. Rook takes H6 check, king takes H6. He did it. Well, I think he's mated, but we'll find out if he isn't. So I'll grab this with check. And if anything, if he's not mated, I guess he's not mated, but I can pick up another pawn before I do anything. Let's make sure. See, what I can do at some point is play queen F2 check, and I sacrifice a pawn just to get the queens off and end the discussion. But I think what I can do before I do that, if I have to go that route, is since I need a rook in here to mate him, is collect a pawn of his first, and if I take another pawn of his, that just puts him down another pawn, and he can't afford to really continue. And finally, the first pawn of mine that he takes is my E pawn, but he takes it on the F2 square. Okay, so what I'm saying is, what I'm going to do is check on the back rank first, then collect the A2 pawn with check. Okay, and if I do that, then I just get another pawn and make it that much quicker and convincing for him that it's time to give this game up. Okay, so queen A1 check forces king E2. Now I play queen takes A2 check, and he's back in the same dilemma, right? Yep, he is. Okay, so queen A1 check. He has one legal move. And I take on A2 with check. Now, there we have it. If he goes to D1, it's mate and 1, so he goes there. Now I can get another pawn with check. Queen D2 check, king G1, queen takes D3 check, king G2, queen E2 check, king H3, queen takes F3 check. Oh, he's losing all his pawns. Ouch. Okay, so what did I say? Queen B1 check. No, queen D2 check. King D1. Then I can even play E2 check. That's gotta hurt. Well, we'll figure it out when we get there. Queen D2 check just does him in. If anything, I can play queen F2 check and trade queens, and he can't do a thing. But I've got the queen. I'm going to use it. I don't care what his queen is threatening. Mine is checking. My checks come first. Okay, so anyway, let's see. I've got this potent threat. Queen takes. Let's see. Okay, king G1. Now, if I check with the pawn, yeah, that works because I just get a queen with double check. I don't need to take on D3. E2 check, king G2, queen pawn promotes to queen, double check. And if king f2, pawn promotes, double check, mate. So that's it. Game is over. I didn't have to take his pawns. Although, look, I could take all of his pawns off just about. Be 8 pawns ahead. Queen takes d3 check, king g2, queen e2 check, king h3, queen takes f3 check, king h2. And at some point, when his king gets to g2, I can just take his queen off. I mean, I'm winning everything he has, but I think the quickest win is e2 check, right? e2 check, king g2, because king f2 is mate in 1, double checkmate, so king g2, make a queen with check. He has king g3, or king h3, and then queen takes queen is mate. This does it. I still haven't lost any of my pawns, or traded any of them. Well, thanks for the game, White. Thanks everyone for watching. Let's just look at a couple of things. I was just talking about winning all of his pawns, but king g2, I think he just gets mated here in a hurry. Double check, he's got to move his king. No, it's not double check, it's just covered check. But he only has one legal, well, he could put his queen there, f2, but he's in trouble. But my other idea, my original idea that I was looking at, just taking all his pawns, I mean, what does he do? Goes back, I just do it again, so king here. And if anything, I can take his queen off, but I was just looking at taking his pawns. That forces king h3. And then I take another pawn with check. Now he has to go back here. And he's not threatening queen takes h6 anymore, or queen h5 check. So I stop and pick up this pawn. And now look at that. I'm 7 pawns ahead. Isn't that amazing to actually be 7 pawns ahead? Back when I was a fish, beginning chess, I remember one time played a Sicilian defense, or somebody played a Sicilian defense against me, so there's an exchange on d4, you know, on the second move, third move, and I proceeded to lose 6 of my 7 pawns in a row about 20 moves later. It's rather humorous, but what did I know? I was just a kid. Anyway, very interesting game. Again, I didn't do anything spectacular other than recognize his mistakes and find good moves from them. So I'm going to end this video. I thank everyone for their time. Look forward to making another one for you in the very near future. Take care.